Hi, this is Jack Stanley. I wanted to talk about perfection of sound. Have you noticed that in the history of the phonograph, in the history of recording, perfection has been reached many, many times? How many times have we heard that listen to the perfection of tone, listen to the perfection of this, the perfection of that, or maybe you might say the sound recording engineers have reached perfection in this. Well, perfection has been found so many times, it's really kind of sickening. Go all the way back to the beginning of the phonograph, the invention of the phonograph. What was said about the tinfoil phonograph? That it perfectly reproduced the voice. Well, as time went by, we developed the wax cylinder, perhaps the bell tainter, the ozocerite. I don't think they ever called it perfect, but they called it an improvement. Once the solid wax cylinder came out, of course, they were referring to it as being perfect. Of course, the Berliner gramophone disc came out, and the tone was just so natural and perfect. Of course, not to be undone when Eldridge Johnson came up with the consolidated disc, the improved gramophone disc. It was perfect. In fact, it had stickers on the back saying it should be reproduced perfectly. And if not, it's the problem of the device you have, not the record. So there. Of course, perfection was reached after that. In fact, if you go through the Victor catalog, they've removed all the records that were not absolutely perfect, and they've replaced them with magnificently recorded records. This was like 1905. Go to 1908, 1909, when you come up with the Columbia double disc record, and Frank C. Stanley waxed poetically about the wonders of the Columbia double disc record. And he talked about the fact that it's the Columbia engineers in the Columbia laboratory have created a near perfect recording system. And in this recording, as most of you know, they play the orchestra bells and every other instrument to show the near perfect quality of Columbia records. Well, that was perfect for a while, and then came the diamond disc, and it was perfect. In fact, it was so perfect that it could stand comparison with the living voice. That was pretty good. But was it perfect? Of course not. Perfection wasn't reached. In fact, what is perfection? Perfection is relative, if you think about it. Once electrical recording came out, it was pretty much perfect. People would write about it. And then, of course, in the 1940s, vinyl came out. And my goodness, that was perfect. And tape came out, and it was perfect. Then in the 1950s, the long play record came out, and they were having all kinds of demonstration records showing the perfection of tone. And then stereo came out, and lots more of demonstration records showing how perfect the sound was. Then you had reel-to-reel tape, gave pretty perfect sound, as they would say. You had the 8-track tape. Did anybody like 8-track tapes? I hated them. Did you ever notice with an 8-track tape, it might play nicely, but right in the middle of your favorite song, it would go click, click. I hated those things. And you had cassette tapes, which were better. Of course, in those days, you also had that commercial. Is it live or is it Memorex? And they would have Ella Fitzgerald sing in Shattered Glass. And they do the same thing with the record playing. Or the cassette tape playing. I don't know. But they said it was perfect. And then I would say probably the finest recording period would be in the late 70s into the early 80s with LPs, and they worked really hard to create the most magnificent recording. And then we went to the CD, which was a gentle notch down because you were dealing with numbers, and you couldn't do a half a number like you could with an analog record. And it was subtle. You didn't really notice it. But it's interesting to note that people today are going back to LPs rather than CDs because they find that they're better. And probably in a good way they were. And then, of course, now we're digital. And today you can download. But I'll tell you something, we have regressed greatly. The quality of tone from a downloaded recording can't hold a candle to the fine recordings made in the 70s and 80s. That is because we are no longer looking for perfection. We're no longer wanting it. We want to be entertained quickly, and we're really not overly concerned how great the quality is. It's not bad, but it can't hold a candle to what was done in the 70s and 80s. But that's perfection. Today, the perfection is the fact you can have so much and so little a machine. And when you think of the past with the monstrous horns and the fragile records and all that stuff, think about how we have changed. There is a certain perfection in what digital is. If it's not exactly the most perfect sound, it certainly is the most perfect method in which to share it. It doesn't take much space. And you can carry 50 pounds of records in that little machine. You can play it on your computer, play it here, there, and everywhere. Of course, you know something, I still look at digital with a little confusion. When I was a little kid, I had a 78 player. I played 78 records, and now here we are with digital and MP3 players and everything else, which I don't even understand. But still, it is what it is. But perfection has kind of gotten out of the equation. I don't think we're trying very hard for that. But think about the history of sound recording. How often perfection was reached. Oh, if Frank C. Stanley could hear something today, he wouldn't be talking about those orchestra bells like he did in 1908. But the fortunate thing for everyone in time is that our ears were of that time. You could never listen to a recording from 1908 with 1960 ears. You couldn't listen to that hissing tinfoil with 1930 ears. You know, it's interesting. Today, we are kind of a polyglot of all different types of sounds and recordings. And today, one can listen to this massive heritage of recordings going back to the 19th century. It's amazing when you think about it. It is the 21st century. And when I say the last century, it's the 20th. I often forget that fact, even though we are 16 years into the 21st century. So always listen to your records, have fun with them, and always remember, at one time, they were perfect.